What's up, North Carolina, and welcome to the Liberty Inc. podcast, your source to all things liberty in North Carolina. We're doing something different. You may notice we are live once again, the second ever live episode of the show. And tonight we are joined by David Coatney. He is actually going to be running as the Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate. I believe it's District 11 up against current incumbent Madison Cawthorn. I am excited to have David here on the show. David released a pretty amazing video talking about his campaign and what got him into that. And I do want you to go over to his website. It is coatneyforcongress.com. And from there, you'll be able to donate to his campaign, look into volunteering, as well as see where he stands on all of the issues. But David, thanks so much for carving out some of your time and coming on here Sunday night. Welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. Happy to be here. And just a quick correction: you said U.S. Senate. It's actually U.S. Representatives.
It is U.S. It is House of Representatives. I'm
not trying to primary Shannon. So
no. I guess I had a Biden moment, right? Always thinking Senate, right?
That's okay.
Yeah, no, and thank you for correcting that. But maybe I'm thinking ahead, right? Win the House, and then we need you in the Senate too. I'm just thinking.
Right, yeah.
Couple years down.
Forward thinking.
Yeah. So David, there's really only a couple of traditions on the show since it's only 13 episodes in. But I always like to start, libertarians come from all different backgrounds, sometimes from the Uniparty, sometimes as independents. So I always, like to bring a guest on and ask, what brought you to the libertarian policy and libertarian ideas? Because, we are a very small minority in the United States. So I'm always curious what brings people, to the ideology.
At least now.
Yeah.
That's going to change. So, yeah. So my path didn't come directly from a political party. I had been a disgruntled independent for quite some time. But, if you go back far enough, I actually served 3 terms as chairman of the college Republicans.
Okay.
Now, this is going all the way back to the 2000 election, Bush Gore. Of course, this was before Bush became known as the president that started endless wars. Back then, we were coming off the back of a budget surplus, and he was the guy running around the country proclaiming, it's the people's money, which sounded great to me, tax cuts, woohoo.
Yeah.
But the last time I voted as a registered Republican was 2008, and I voted for 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and a Green Party candidate.
Okay.
Even worked on the Green Party candidate's campaign. So I think that's the moment I realized I'm really an independent. Furthermore, I didn't like the partisan nonsense. So I decided to switch my affiliation at that time. But it went beyond mere partisanship. There was an inherent hypocrisy and double standard being applied by both of the major parties. Yeah. They would campaign on one thing, they get elected, and then they do something completely different. It's almost as if the person you voted for and the person you were elected were not the same person. Then both parties, would scream and yell and point the finger at the other party for doing something. But when their party did it, they were suddenly silent on the issue, almost as if their problem wasn't as much with the issue as it was the other party.
Right.
So, like many citizens, who get frustrated with the political system, I stopped voting for a time. And that wasn't the right approach, but it felt right at the time. And the one thing I knew is I wasn't going to vote for the lesser of 2 evils anymore. I'd heard that argument enough, and I was done with it. So it's kind of funny because some of my conservative friends began calling me a classical liberal, while some of my liberal friends called me a classical conservative.
Right.
But the truth is, while I held some views that align with the Democratic Party and some views that align with the Republican Party, when I stepped back and really analyzed it, they pretty much all align with the Libertarian Party. For the most part, I'm also a pragmatist, so I'm probably more of a Gary Johnson libertarian.
Sure.
But it really made a lot of sense that those views would align because the libertarian platform is incredibly consistent. For example, does prohibition work? Well, Republicans would say, well, it'll work over here, but it won't work over there. Democrats would say, no, you're wrong. It'll work over here, but not over there. Libertarians would just say, no. Also with the old parties, the consent of the governed seemed dependent on who they were and how you felt about them. And the same with protecting individual liberties. They would both give lip service to the values of protecting freedom, but there was always a caveat, yes, but what if they're gay? Or what if they want to protect their home with a high capacity magazine? Or what if their speech was something that I felt was obscene or offensive?
Right.
And you really didn't have those, for lack of a better term, freedom asterisks with libertarians, right? Right there, it was consistent.
Yep.
So I realized that was kind of a long answer, but I basically went from disgruntled independent to independent that voted libertarian to eventually making it official and coming to terms with the fact that, as much as I preached against political parties for a solid decade, the reality is I felt like I finally had a home.
And now you're taking it to the next step and said, you know what, I'm going to run for U.S. House of Representatives on top of that. Right, yeah. Which that takes kind of that next level, because a lot of us want to look at it and it's funny you talk about how paying lip service, right, where they do those things, and you mentioned you're more on the pragmatic side of things. There's lots of factions within libertarianism, and one of the things that I always think of there is I'm pretty anti-state as a whole at this point, and not quite full-blown anarchist, but definitely in the minarchist kind of realm there. But when I look at that, and I just look historically, I like history and studying things there, and when you look at our system where we essentially have a two-party state versus a one-party state, and the reality is it's almost the same thing, right? In a one-party state, you really have to worry about, revolution, right? Like armed revolution, when you see the communist revolutions in Soviet Union and China and places like that, where with a two-party state, you're trying to stave off the same thing, right? Like you don't want people to be outrageous about what you're doing and cut off the power. So the sheer existence of that two-party system is, well, okay, instead of you getting so upset that you rise up against whatever tyranny we're putting on you and whatever liberties you're stripping you of, well, you're going to say, we're going to go vote for these other people. And then they get in there and they do the exact same thing, where generally most libertarians are, and I hate when they describe it as fiscally conservative, right? I think it's more fiscally responsible, right? Fiscally commonsensical. Yeah. But, when you look at that, that's how we get $29 trillion in debt, right? Where you have people zoned into these parties and it's like, okay, you won, right? You didn't like the other guy, your guy wins. Now what? Like, I think to the most recent one, and I don't want to pick on Democrats or Biden, because I'll be honest, Republicans, I pick on you too if you know me in real life. But you look at Biden, right? He's campaigning on all these things, all these free money things, right? Student loan forgiveness, all these things that they promise, right? And Trump was promising, his different bag of candy, different bag of candy for you. But at the end of the day, they get in there, it's not going to happen, right? They're too busy, funneling money to big pharma, the military-industrial complex, all the special interests. And it's really us regular Americans who kind of get screwed over. And that's why, I love it on your on your website, like on your campaign site. So I pulled it up there, and right there on the front of the page, on your main one, I love it. You got this sign and it scrolls, right? So it may not be there. If you go to David's website right there, you may have to wait for it to scroll. But it has Republicans and Democrats, a viable third option. Enough is enough. And that was something that really like we just need more people to get that, right? Because
absolutely,
I tell everybody, I tell my Republican friends the same thing I tell my Democrat friends. And when you hear this, like, people are like, why would you say it? And I tell them, if you elected libertarians, you will actually get more of the things that your party is promising you than you will by voting for your party.
That's the irony, right?
It's true, though. It's true. I mean, if libertarians were elected, you would get real police reform. Period.
Well, Mike, if there's one thing that we have learned from history, it's that we don't learn from history.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. So the topics are always different. I really wanted to kind of dig into your candidacy, right? So you've got some great points on the website. And again, that's why I threw it in the intro. Definitely check out David's website. He's got a lot of stances on issues, right? Foreign intervention, and all of the other issues. And I implore you, go check out his website. If you can, please donate. We need to have more libertarian voices out there on the mainstream, challenging people at, elections that matter, right? Get David on a debate stage, and I promise you it will be a beautiful thing. But David, I think one of the big ones that's kind of a relevant topic now, right, just today, and that's thinking foreign intervention. So I'd love to chat a little bit there, right? We look at what's going on in the world, and I like to keep a lot of things on this podcast focused towards North Carolina, but with what's going on in Afghanistan right now, it's hard to completely stay away from that on a political
Right.
podcast. And that's a tough issue, right? Where, I think back to, what war used to mean, right? Throughout the history in the United States, where it was something that Congress had to be involved in, right? And if we were able to get you elected, I have a feeling I know how you would vote if they asked you to go to war. But I'd love to just chat, everyone says, and this is what scares me, is the way the media is pushing back on this thing where, we're getting out. It's been 20 years. Whatever objectives we were trying to do, like if it's nation building, you better be prepared to make Afghanistan the 51st state and stay there forever, because that's what it would realistically take.
That's the commitment it takes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it would take, is you're the 51st
from
state.
From a practical standpoint, yeah.
What does that look like? Because, I see some people who are like, Trump would have done it differently. And I look at it and I say, there's no easy way to end a war, especially when you're leaving the war as the loser. Because that's the reality. And in the eyes of the Taliban, we put them out 20 years ago. We pull out, they're right back there. 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban.
There is an easy way.
Yeah.
Don't get involved to begin with, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if we had taken an isolationist policy to begin with, would 9/11 have ever occurred? This is what you have to ask.
Yeah.
We create a lot of our own problems, and it's really tragic, especially what we've seen in the news the last week. And while I think, libertarians have been saying this entire time, this is not going to end well,
right?
Because we have seen how previous interventions have worked out over the last 70 years. To be honest, I mean, I could have never envisioned this. I mean, the actual execution of our withdrawal was butchered to such an extent. It's almost a worst case scenario, and I go back to the original announcement of the war on terror,
right,
and building this coalition of nations. And I thought it was a great thing at the time, but my first assumption was that the war on terror was going to be a series of covert operations around the world, seeking specific terrorist cells and networks and individuals. Never for a moment did I think we were going to topple governments in Afghanistan and Iraq and do the things that we've done in the previous 20 years. And I think it's sad because, my heart goes out to the brave men and women that served our country. And now you listen to some of them, they're wondering, what was it for?
Yeah.
And they fought for us. They fought for freedom. And I believe now it's time we fight for them. The American government has neglected their needs for far too long. And, said, thank you for your service right before turning our backs on them. And that's why I believe the revenue that we currently send overseas in the form of foreign aid, it needs to be reallocated to properly support them during and after their time of service.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, David. In fact, I'm on the board of a charity, and we actually work to try to help veterans because we see PTSD is real, and people are coming back, and it's really impacting lives. And that was one thing that I saw there, right, where you saw it there, and it was something that I couldn't have segued into it better. Like I was going to try and segue into that because it was a position I saw on your site, and you just kind of hit it there. But think of that, right? We spent $1 trillion in Afghanistan, right? 20 years, and $1 trillion kind of a low estimate on what we spent over that 20 years there. But think about what that would be. I mean, you could use a fraction of what we spent over there to take care of our veterans who came home. And that's my thing is I have a lot of friends, and my brother was a Marine. I have friends and family who are very passionate about the military, and I am too. And I just want them to know too, it wasn't the boots that failed. Like you look at all of the missions here, it was the suits that failed. It was these politicians, it was these executives within the military industrial complex who are at the end of the day only making a profit off of the blood of human beings somewhere on this planet, right? You're not buying a new bomb unless you set off a bomb that killed some people. So I mean, I've got some real serious personal issues, with the ethical existence of the military-industrial complex and war for profit. But how does that work? Because I look at this, and libertarians have been consistent. We are very consistently anti-war, right? Which and part of me wonders, on the branding thing, anti-war. Really we're pro-peace, right? We're pro-peace with everyone. But that's one thing that you hit on that actually, I feel strongly about too, where foreign aid, right? Where you think of all of the foreign aid that we're spending everywhere. At the end of the day, it's not like everything is perfect here, right? Like Americans, it's not like Americans are so wealthy that we don't need that, right? I saw a statistic like 40% of American families can't afford an unexpected $500 expense, right? And that you think of that and you're like, well, why are we spending $100,000 to drop a bomb on a mountain halfway across the world and stealing from these people to pay for that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, stop doing all of that. And what happens? What happens if we reinvest it there? I like to think that we'd have better outcomes across the board.
Absolutely.
But what I'd like to know is, how do you fight that? That's my, because I look at it here, and we look at the House of Representatives, and forget the dysfunctionality of government for a minute. But we fast forward. It's 2023. You're now in office. What does that look like from the House of Representatives? Because what scares me is about how badly botched this is I look at kind of the overall sentiment, and it was almost, left, right, center. Everybody was tired of the war in Afghanistan, because 20 years of war will do that to a country. But now you see how badly this was bungled, and part of me just looks at it and says, you're seeing all of these images. The media is pumping that out, and it's horrible. We lost 13 American heroes. But I'm seeing almost a turn in a sentiment, and it worries me that how bad the exit is in the minds of some people, especially with the media twisting it, almost kind of drums up sentiment to go back in some capacity, right? Maybe it's not, and that's my fear, and I wonder, this is a good thing. Most Americans wanted this to be over. And, the media, call it what it will, their narratives and how they present information. This was the toughest I think they've ever been on Biden, right? The toughest they've ever been on Biden. And, there were other things that they could have been tough on Biden for. Why is ending the war the thing that they say, we're going to make this the worst possible thing? Even though there were other possible things that presidents have done even before Biden, like some things that if the media looks at, these are objectively horrible, but they're like, we don't want to pitch this story. It's going to make our person look bad at the wrong time. To me, that's scary that the media is jumping on, and yes, ending a war is, there's no pretty way to do that, right? There's going to be bad things. Not pretty. War's not pretty. But that's what scares me is I'm seeing some people on both, people that I know that are either traditionally Republican or Democrat. Like some are like, well, now we got to go back and get those ISIS-K guys, right? Like you look at this, and this could have been the way to wind down and come with, and that's just my fear is how do we stop them from kind of pushing us back there in some different capacity? And then how do we, if you win, right? That's the kind of thing. You're in the House. You're the only Libertarian in the House. What does that look like? You're sitting there in the chamber, and they're bringing these things up, and trying to approve weapons deals with Raytheon and all these other things that are going on. How do you use that platform as, say, the sole Libertarian in the House of Representatives at the time to make an impact and try to help save Americans from having to deal with more of this abuse?
Well, you have to sit down with the other members of the body, and you have to sit down almost as a centrist voice to some degree to try to persuade them from a side that they may not necessarily be opposed to, because it's part of that bipartisan mechanism that they're automatically going to shut you out because you're a Democrat or Republican. So I think if we can get more third-party candidates, if we can get more independents in there, I definitely think that helps our chances of being a voice for reason, because we can go to both sides and work with both sides on these issues as well and say, listen, you have to think about what got us into this mess to begin with. You have to look at it practically and think about our identity as a country. And when we launched as a country, think about this. We were the first country to adopt a constitution. We were the first country to adopt a form of modern democracy. And if you look at what happened in the years and in the centuries that followed, amazing thing happened. Other countries started mimicking what we did. They started adopting democratic forms of government. They started giving power back to the people. And so we didn't do that by enforcing our views and enforcing our government on other cultures, which only leads to resentment. It only rallies the other side to fight against us, right? It only creates more enemies. We did that by leading the world by example. And so those resources that we are using to go overseas and fight these wars, those are resources that we should be focusing on domestic issues and helping our own citizens get our own house in order and protect the rights of our people.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the things that I think of too is, what's it really going to take, right? Because, I do like to think that especially when I look at the party now and the way that more and more people are being exposed to libertarian thought, right? Whatever you may think of him, right? When Jack Dorsey tweeted out just a link to Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard, I look at that and people are like, they don't know what to think of it, right? Here's the guy shutting down free speech, shooting out Anatomy of the State. But I look at it and I say, I'm just going to take that as a win, right? Like if more people read Anatomy of the State and understand the mechanisms that the state uses to keep people in power, it all rolls back to, whoa, maybe the state's there. And the libertarians, we said, it's right there in the preamble. We're challenging the cult of the omnipotent state, right? We want to roll that back. And to me, again, that's an encouraging thing. But, at the same time, I'm a realist, right? It's going to take more than one elected House representative to get real libertarian change at the policy level done in the United States. But at the same time, I feel like, that first one, right? Like that's the catalyst, right? We may not win it in 2022, right? But what happens 10 years after? David Coatney wins in 2022. Maybe we get 5 more in the House by 2024. But you start to build, and I feel like once we get to a big enough voice there and people see it as a viable third party, like, I know you're running for a national election, so that's why I'm kind of talking a little more national politics, but so many people I've talked to who are running for local office, right? Their whole idea is win libertarian, candidates locally. Turn a county gold, right? A small county, turn it gold, but then implement libertarian principles. And just like, you said, good ideas, don't need to be forced, right? Like if people look over, hey, man, why'd they cut their property taxes in half at the county next door and mine gave a 20% increase, right? And then all of a sudden, now you have 2 gold counties, and it starts to spread almost.
Right. And you have over 200 libertarians that have been elected in local office. Yeah. And we're seeing that they're implementing libertarian ideas, and it's working. I do think we need a barbell approach. Now you're a finance guy. You probably listen to Jim Cramer. I'm not going to ask you whether you like him or not, but he always preaches the barbell approach. And so I think when it comes to local and federal, you need those candidates that can win local elections and make a positive impact in their community and show people that libertarianism works. Yeah. And we have candidates all over the country that are doing exactly that. But you also need candidates to run those district-wide and statewide races to cast a wider net. Right. And in the process, you expose more people to libertarian ideas, and the more people you reach, the more of them will then go vote in those elections next time around. And so when I look at that, I think it reminds me of a story. There are 3 bricklayers. Okay. And they're laboring in the hot sun. It's 95 degrees, hottest day of the summer, no shade. They're out there in the middle of it, working a full day. And 2 of them look very tired, very angry, disgruntled, upset. One of them is just whistling away, happy as can be. So this guy walks by and he asks him, he's very curious. He says, let me ask you, he asked the first one, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm laying bricks. Isn't it obvious? Fair enough. So he asked the second guy and he said, what are you doing? He said, I'm making $20 an hour. That's what I'm doing. He asked the third guy, what are you doing? He said, I'm building a school. Which one of those do you think was most content, happiest? So if we go through and we just do the task just to be able to do the task to say, yay, we're a third party and we can vote our conscience and be happy about it. It's easy to reach burnout, right? If you're doing it for some reward, you're never truly going to be happy. Maybe you'll be a little bit happy during the time of your payday, right? But that's about as far as that goes. But when you can see the long-term vision, you can see that light and what we're working towards at the end of the tunnel. There's something beautiful on the other end of that. And so I think that's how we have to look at it.
Yeah, no, that's a really great story. too, where you think of it, and I think of that, as an employer, right? You run a small business, I run a small business. I don't have any employees yet. Part of it is probably hesitancy in that exact question, right? I don't want to hire the bricklayer who's just sitting there thinking I'm making $20 an hour, right? How do you find that person who, in the analogy, is building the school, right? Because that's who, as an employer, you want to find those people, whoever they are.
Absolutely.
And when I think of that's a great analogy, and I think that really hits on why you're running too. Like I can see that. When I saw your campaign announcement video, and you really come out and say, bring in someone who's not a part of this two-party nonsense fighting that's going on, and get real changes. Because I really think there's. I just think through pieces of legislation that go through the House, right? And I could probably look there and think through, there'd be a Libertarian who'd vote with all these Republicans on this bill. Then he'd vote with all of these Democrats on this one. And then you'd get a piece of bipartisan garbage and they'd be the only no vote on it, right? All the Republicans and Democrats are together, and you'd have that one voice against it. When you think through this, right, you're going up against, the machine, right? Like when you're going up in a federal election, you're going to be facing the full dollar, the full dollar investments of the RNC and the DNC, which is a challenging thing. So I did want to talk to one thing, again, campaign related. What are your needs? So I've seen on your website, obviously, and I've plugged it a couple times, and sorry, shameless plug. I'm going to plug it a few more times to go donate to Coatney for Congress. But one of the things there is volunteer, get involved. What are some things right now in North Carolina? Right, we've got a little over a year going into this election. What do you need as a candidate? Right, if we've got some North Carolina libertarians listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube. How can we, in addition to to bringing our treasure, how can we bring our talent and time? What do you need at that campaign level? What if we can get one recruit or two recruits or 20 recruits out of this? How can we best help the Coatney for Congress campaign?
Well, if you're in District 11, obviously we're going to need volunteers for 2022. We're going to need individuals to phone bank, which phone banks can really be anywhere, so you don't have to be local. To phone bank. That's the great news about that. We're going to need individuals to knock doors, drop off postcards, hang signs in their yard. Once that time comes, obviously there's a window on that when we can't do that. But we're also going to have a launch rally, probably looking at late October, thinking the 24th right now. So if you'd like to come out and support the cause, you can follow Coatney for Congress on Facebook for those updates. And if you're not District 11, but you would still like to support the cause, like Mike said, we do need donations. We need to get the message out, and that's going to require running ads on social media, Facebook, YouTube. We need print marketing materials. So we've made it really easy. The donate button's right there at the top, and any amount, no matter how small, is going to be extremely helpful to the cause. So it all adds up.
Awesome. Now it's funny the little mix up in my intro there. I know you're not running for Senate because I had the guy running for Senate, Shannon Bray, on episode 2 of this podcast, and one of the things I was talking to Shannon about was debates. Right, the way they did him dirty with that one, and they basically came out and said one of Shannon's goals was we have to raise $50,000. Right, if we raise $50,000. He's on the debate stage, and that's something that I want to see more of. Looking at the 2020 election, how they did Joe, it was just horrific. I mean, and I truly think if Joe would have been able to get up there on the presidential debate stage, and if Spike would have got up there on the vice presidential debate stage, I think the Libertarian Party would have gotten so many more votes than ever before in history. And I think the media and the establishment knew that. They knew that. Which is why, they make up this whole poll system to get on the debate. And I looked at it, and someone pointed out, they did a binary choice on the poll that was there. Like, it's not which of these candidates that are on the ballot are you voting for. It's Joe Biden, Donald Trump, no Green Party, no Libertarian. No. How do you get 5% of that vote when you're not on the question there? And I would love to see more of that, especially there. Are there any things there that help get you on the debate stage there? Is there anything that we can kind of try and rally around and target. Because I as much as I want to help Shannon out with that, I know I'm going to have him back on the podcast when election season is coming up as well. I'd love to have you back then also. But is there anything there? I don't know. He just told me, hey, they basically told him if he raises $50,000, that gets him on the debate stage. Is there something that we can do to get you on a debate stage?
Well, they haven't set the criteria yet, so we're still a little ways out. We haven't even went through the primaries. So we actually have, I think, 4 Republicans running against Madison.
Okay.
So he's being primaried by his own party. We have 6 Democrats running, the last I saw. And so we're still early in the process that they haven't set the criteria for that. But the more people show up for the polls and the more people that donate, I think the greater our chances are going to be of getting on that debate stage.
Okay.
Obviously, I want to be on the debate stage.
Right.
I would love to be on the debate stage, and if any of the candidates want to just have a town hall with me, I'm open. Let's come have a town hall. You want to do a debate? Let's do a debate. I'm completely game. But that's not going to deter me one way or the other. So we're going to get our message out there regardless of what happens. But yeah, we definitely need the help when that time comes. So
no, and that's my thing is I look at how they did it at the presidential level, and at the end of the day, North Carolina voters, we're a purple state, right? It's we're one of those states that's a toss-up state, which some could say, okay, maybe you have roughly the same amount of Republicans and Democrats, right? I think we're a purple state because we've got a really large block of independents who kind of are going to vote based on who they think's there. Yeah, you've got your core Republicans, your core Democrats. There's no changing those. I shouldn't say that. There is changing those. It just might be a little bit harder to do in some cases and take a little more time. But I feel like that independent vote in North Carolina, they do swing. Sometimes they'll vote Democrat, sometimes they'll vote Republican, sometimes, hopefully, we can convince them to vote Libertarian. Right. But I think that's a testament to North Carolina voters, that if North Carolina voters are going to be engaging politically and saying, you know what, I'm going to listen to this candidate, and my vote is not going to be always red or always blue, or right. I want to hear what this person has to say. I think that our ideas could have that opportunity, and I just fear that the media, the same way they do on the national stage, is just going, they know with the sentiment that's going on, they don't want, good libertarian candidates out there because it's not good for the uniparty.
No, it isn't, because it's amazing when you start talking to people. As I go out and I'm meeting people and sharing information in the district, it's amazing how many people are libertarian and don't know it, right? Until they realize what libertarianism is, and they're like, well, that's kind of hard to argue with, right? And so that's my goal. I want to help awaken people from the false dichotomy of this two-party system. Business as usual hasn't worked out so well for us.
Right.
It's created a divided America. With that said, I'm unlike the other candidates. I don't want to spend my time attacking the other candidates and talking about what they did wrong,
right.
Because I think that's turned a lot of Americans off. I would prefer to run a campaign that focuses on issues and finds a better way forward.
I like it. So, yeah, that goes back to that two parties. We're too busy fighting, where you're coming out with good ideas. That's
yeah. So one of the things that I would like to talk about, I would like to focus on is immigration reform.
Yeah.
So our immigration channels, they need to be more reasonable. They need to be more accessible while treating immigrants with compassion. So this one's personal to me. In November of 2019, my wife was sworn in as an American citizen. It was one of the proudest moments of her life. It was one of the proudest moments of mine. But that distinction did not come easy. I stood side by side with her as we went through the entire process. It took 8 years, thousands and thousands of dollars, enough paperwork you could probably stack from floor to ceiling.
Yeah.
Incredible amount of redundancies, bottlenecks, and more headache than you can imagine. She's proud to be an American, but the system that got us to that point is fundamentally broken. And Mike, most of it doesn't even make sense. I remember the third time my wife was fingerprinted, because, as we all know, fingerprints change, right?
Yeah, all the time.
We received the notice in the mail on Thursday afternoon, and the notice said that, we had to be at this USCIS center 3 states away on Tuesday morning at 7:30 a.m. Now, we had a USCIS center that does fingerprints literally an hour away from where we live. So what are we doing? And it's not like they give you an option, if this time doesn't work for you, call us 800 number to reschedule, nothing like that.
Right.
You just have to be there or risk being thrown back to the bottom of the pile. Now, since we received this 5 days before the actual appointment, I'm wondering, what if we were on vacation that week and missed the letter? Or what if someone's in the hospital at the time? And, fortunately for us, my employment situation affords me some flexibility, but there really is a tremendous amount of redundancies throughout the process, redundant questions, forms, protocols. I found myself frequently filling out the same form at each stage in the process, once again, with information that doesn't change, and thinking, don't you already have this on file? And the government website is antiquated. They don't provide, they do provide instructions, but the instructions, they're very ambiguous. Once again, you're talking about a stack of instructions like this. Everything is in long text form, written in legal jargon. It's very intimidating for an immigrant who just wants to come to this country seeking a better life.
Sure.
The legal terminology and complexities of the forms alone would be a good reason to hire an immigration attorney, but the high legal fees associated with hiring an attorney is the reason many immigrants choose not to go that way.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's way too easy to make errors, and applicants, they find the forms to be confusing and have a difficult time keeping track of the paperwork. An overwhelming percentage of these individuals have their cases delayed because they didn't have all the required documents. And one small error on one of these forms is enough to get the whole thing thrown out. And you have to start that stage of the process all over again. So we did it without an attorney. And, I found it difficult for myself and my English-speaking wife from Ontario. Imagine how difficult that would be if English was your second language.
Sure.
How frustrating is the process for that individual? So I keep hearing people say, why don't immigrants just go through the proper immigration channels? That's why. And if they're a sibling of a U.S. citizen, they might still face wait times of 10 years or more in some cases. For certain countries, I think like Mexico, China, with higher immigration levels, wait times can be closer to 20 years. I happen to believe you shouldn't have to spend a lifetime seeking a better life. So we know what the problem is. What's the solution? The process needs to be simplified. It demands things of you that quite frankly, shouldn't be necessary. So my plan is to go back through the entire process, piece by piece, line by line, protocol by protocol, and come up with a plan that's reasonable and accessible to the average person. This includes shortening the wait time, automating the onboarding process. I think there needs to be an app you can have on your phone that clarifies matters in layman's terms, consolidates the proper supplemental documents in one place, greatly reduces the tasks required to apply, which in return will reduce the workload of those processing the applications, which will speed up the process. The app can streamline identifying the proper forms, which should be reduced to what's absolutely necessary, keep track of the appointments and important dates, send adequate notifications, and have videos that walk them through the process on how to fill each line so that there aren't any errors. It also needs to be accessible from a financial standpoint. The reason many people choose not to become American citizens is because they simply can't afford it.
Yeah.
It's expensive, it's arduous, it's complex. That absolutely has to change. And you think about...
Well, when you said there was no reason, when you said that there was, it's difficult for no reason, someone's going to, call me a conspiracy theorist for this one, but I think there is a reason. We just don't want to acknowledge the reason. Right. Because it's profitable to government and to special interests that lobby to make that. I mean, immigration attorneys make a lot of money. And if the process was that simple, which, honestly, I think of it here and, being a libertarian, I'm like, man, if there's anybody who's a software or app developer, David just gave you $1 billion idea live on this this podcast, right? Where if you're able to come up with some kind of tool like that, an app like that. I mean, again, that's $1 billion idea that David just shared here. But simplifying that process, it makes sense for people, right? It makes sense for someone who may fall in love across the border on vacation or anything else, and to have to go through these processes. It's kind of cliche, and I get that it's dramatized. My wife loves that show 90 Day Fiancé, but just watching that, which is, an entertainment reality show, you see the challenges of that some people are going through, where it's taking years to bring, to come back, and even saying, I'm going to support this person for 10 years, no matter what. It should be as simple as, you are? Great.
Right.
So, done, right? That should be a nice, easy one. You establish those kinds of things and moving on. But what happens to immigration attorneys, right? That entire profession has a vested interest in it, and I think that's the problem of big government, right? Is you grow government so big, and now you've got this department, this department, this department. You have all these jobs because every different industry is lobbying each of them, right? And that's how you get so much replication. And and meanwhile, taxpayers are paying for all of it, right? Like we're all paying for all of that. That's part of that 29 trillion that we owe is the 4 different people that processed. Or the 3 different times that your wife's fingerprints were taken, right? We had to pay for a person to do that each of the 3 times. Now multiply that by, millions of people that are having to go through the process. What would it take to do that, right? Because I agree. And I think, immigration is one where, I think back, I traced my ancestry, right? My mom's side of the family came over from Europe in the 1850s ish. My dad's side of the family all came from Puerto Rico, but back then it was pretty simple, right? You went in through there.
That's what America is.
Yeah. How do we get back to that? You as one voice, right? We fast forward. Right. You beat Madison Cawthorn. You're our our representative for District 11. How do we get that kind of change? Because Republicans and Democrats have been talking about immigration reform for most of my adult life. My first vote, again, I'm from Broward County, Florida. My first vote was Al Gore in 2000. I was born in 1982. My first vote, 18-year-old kid, most bluest town in Florida, or bluest county in Florida. I voted for Al Gore. I was obviously very upset. It was emotional, and part of me gives sympathy to all of those people with all of this stuff from Trump. I'm like, hey, yeah, I felt that back in 2000.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It sucks to feel that way, but let's move on. But how do we get there, right? Because they've both talked about it, but none of them are doing anything. And that seems like such a common, a common sense solution. Simplify the process, take out the layers of bureaucracy that cause fingerprints to be done 3 times. How do we get that moving along? Are you the catalyst? Is it going to take you and a couple others?
I have no problem putting in the footwork, and I have no problem putting my name on a bill. Obviously, I would need to get other people involved.
Right.
But having been through the process, it's easy for me to go by and see these are all the redundancies, and I still have all the forms and the whole process outlined. So I think it's easier for me to be able to do that. And then it's just a matter of finding common sense individuals in Congress that want to come on board with it and help author something that actually sees that type of progress. I mean, ultimately, I do believe the type of immigration reform we're talking about has the highest likelihood of being able to garner bipartisan support. I mean, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to find common ground on finding a solution that simplifies that process. I mean, even if, let's say, for example, you're one of these Republicans, some of the redder counties, about the current state of immigration. They're concerned about our southern border. And while we might have some disagreements, obviously I don't support a border wall. I don't support eminent domain or sending a bunch of federal agents out to separate families. You have to admit that fixing the legal process would incentivize more immigrants to actually go through it, right, to become American citizens. And so I think there's a legitimate argument here to be made to both Republicans and Democrats for simplifying the immigration process.
Sure. I mean, when it comes to that, I've read stories from various news outlets where they look at it and say, it can cost $10,000 for a coyote to get you across the southern border. Part of that is free markets playing into account. Like if it was a simple process and it cost $200 and an app on your phone to go through that process, the cartels are not going to get $10,000 to smuggle a human across the southern border, right? But the fact that it is years of process, if you involve a lawyer, which I mean, I hate to say it, you shouldn't need a PhD to navigate the immigration process without a lawyer. I didn't introduce, you have one, but you were able to do it on your own. But when you hire immigration attorneys, like that's almost setting the floor for what it's worth to a coyote who's trying to bring someone in illegally. Oh, hey, you want to hire an immigration attorney? That's going to cost you $15,000 in 3 years. I'll get you across for 10 in 2 days, right? And that's how things get awful. And when I look there at the southern border, the other big thing there, which is again, libertarians have been saying this forever, end the drug war. If you end the drug war,
Oh, yeah.
most of the problems at the southern border, I mean, you still have an immigration problem, right? You still have the coyotes, which, there's a simple fix to that. But a lot of the violence and the bad things happening on the southern border are related to the drug war, right? Legalized drugs get tax-paying American businesses so that, now the cartels are at a disadvantage, right? Because now they've got a competitor in America making the same product, but now they have to ship it into America and they have to take on the shipping costs. So at least there's competition there. But again, I think that's another one of those ones where government's too big. There's too many special interests that want different things, and again, it's sad to think of, but I wouldn't be surprised if at various levels of government that there's corruption and that the cartel may have a politician or two in their pocket. Maybe not at the federal level, but I'm sure that a local town border, a border town is probably not that expensive, when you combine, when you're a cartel to do that kind of thing. If you just get rid of the drug war, it stops becoming profitable business. And that to me, that seems like the biggest no-brainer in 2021. But I don't think either side of the uniparty is going to do that either. I really don't.
There are two, and I'm glad you touched on that. There are two wars that I want to make a focus of my campaign. One of them is obviously the war on drugs, which I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah.
And the other is there's a war on small business. And we don't see it like that. But my clients are all small business owners, as am I. So I work with them on a daily basis, and I see the impact the government overreach has in their life. Small businesses, they're coming out of this period, Mike, where some of them were locked down for months on end, told they weren't allowed to make a living. They've been disproportionately targeted. They were told you can't have two people in your boutique storefront, yet they're watching people pour into Walmart and Home Depot by the hundreds, and it reeks of hypocrisy. So fast forward to 2021, now they've reopened. Some of them are hanging on by a thread, doing everything they can to make ends meet. And the government is now threatening to raise their taxes and their payroll. And it doesn't occur to Washington, this might be bad for the economy. Yet the conversation, if you listen to what they're saying, it always seems singularly obsessed with what Jeff Bezos is doing or how this would affect Walmart. Taxes on businesses are then portrayed by wealthy CEOs flying around in private jets. And this is what you hear all the time. Yet there are 32 million businesses in the United States. And the majority of them are limited liability corporations, LLCs. These people don't know anything about private jets.
Yep.
These are your neighbors, your friends, your family. But, God forbid we talk about how these policies affect them. Small businesses are routinely thrown under the bus in these policy debates, not even given a mention.
Yeah, no, that's something I was actually at a protest today in downtown Charlotte, and that one of the speakers was hitting on that exact thing. Where you look at the past year, the wealth transition from the middle class to the upper, what happened, right? Here's the thing: you have all these people, the government coming in and saying you're non-essential. Well, to those 40% of American households that can't afford an unexpected $500 expense, I don't care what that person's job is or where it is. That is essential to that family. That family is suffering if that person's not allowed to go to work. And like you said, you look at Jeff Bezos, Amazon, all of these mega corporations, their stocks are through the roof. They have consolidated. They have, as the small businesses go under, and this is something I'm guess what? If a small competitor is now being, or a mid-sized competitor, maybe a regional, distributor of something is starting to go under because the government made it so hard. Guess what? Now Amazon's coming in and picking them up for pennies on the dollar, right? They're getting the inflation from shutting everybody else out. And with all this new capital, now they're going in and stripping those up. And it's been the greatest transfer away from small businesses to big businesses in history.
We should be doing everything we can right now to encourage them to keep their doors open. And instead, government keeps doing the opposite, keeps getting in the way. Now, personally, I support the fair tax, which would eliminate the corporate and payroll taxes entirely. But at minimum, I do mean at minimum, businesses making less than $1 million a year in revenue should be tax exempt. I mean, and you think about that, we do that with individuals, right? If you are below a certain income threshold as an individual, you're exempt from federal income taxes.
Yep.
So why would we not treat businesses the same way? If you really want to encourage local economic growth, higher wages, lower unemployment, and see small businesses in your area succeed, then it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I just wonder where it's going, right? Where you look at things now, and I know healthcare is a topic we didn't really get to touch too much on yet, and we're coming up on 50 minutes. I don't want to be too greedy with the time there of going over, but I look at that there where when it comes out, and I think the general position is we're against most mandates, right, from government at least, and that's my concern now is even if it gets pushed through, right, in my business I'm home based. I get most things delivered to my door. It really doesn't impact me all that much on a personal level, but I think about it for the companies, right? Like if someone has a small boutique shop or a store somewhere, and the government, when you look at how these mandates are likely going to be, at least I look towards how it was done, I think in California, right? California passed one where they say, okay, we have this mandate, but it's on the businesses to enforce them. Right. So what happens, right? If there's a cop walking down the street and they see someone comes into the store and isn't wearing a mask, is that cop going to go in there and harass that small business owner and have them pay a fine? Right. Like you're shifting enforcement for small business there. Like what if the small business is like, I've put up, glass, there's hand sanitizer there. There's all of these other mechanisms. But if I slip up and an enforcer sees the wrong person come in and I don't catch it in time, are they going to come in and slap me with a $5,000 fine? If they slap Walmart with it, Walmart doesn't even notice it. That's a write-off to them. Oops, oh darn, we got hit with this. We're a small business, that could be their month's profit, right? A whole month's profit in a fine. And that's what scares me, where I look at it. If this war on small business continues, and you go down the route of passports, and there's still arguments there, even in libertarian circles, of how passports or mandates work, of whether they're government influenced or private businesses, and we'll say that for a different day. But I just think that's part of I think that's part of that war on small business, where I look at these actions and it's like, it's not hard to see that that's what's going to happen if you don't, if you put things out there. And that's why, when people, I saw conservatives for the most part that were freaking out and talking about, net neutrality, right? And that whole thing, or Section 230, where they're like, oh, you got to repeal this. And I'm like, nothing, these big tech companies want nothing more than that, right? Like that would be the biggest gift you could possibly handle, because every single startup that ever comes in the future is small. They are not going to have the dollars and the manpower to fight those legal battles over that hurdle, where a company like Facebook, Twitter, they'd have no problem. We got to spend $3 million in legislation. That's it. Yeah. Consider it done. Oh, that other company over there that had something really innovative and could have been something special, they're not going to get off the ground, because the government's now going to regulate them into, it'd be the biggest gift in the world. And, I sense the frustration of people when it comes to censorship, right? And part of me gets the public square argument, right? You've built, yes, it's a private platform, but when you're talking about connecting, 200 million Americans, right? Like, I don't like to see speech stifled. I believe that the best counter to any bad speech, no matter how bad it is good speech, right? Absolutely. Like that's the best solution. And in my mind, even at the private level of censoring, in my opinion, it helps bad ideas flourish, right? If you push them underground as opposed to disinfecting them in the open with good ideas, that's how you have these, conspiracy theories and, hate groups and all these things that they can't go in the public, so because they get shut down there. Now they fester here with nothing but a bubble, and anybody from the outside looking in doesn't have the ability to say, if I put out, hey, horrible idea, you could come back with, hey, here's why that idea is horrible, and here's a better solution. The public doesn't see that discourse anymore if you don't allow that discourse to happen. Right. So exactly. That's just what I fear, in the war on small business, that's where it's going. And I see that as just another means, for little things that, all kinds of little taxes that, or fines and fees for different things that to a small business, they're meaningful. They have a real impact. And for big businesses, it's a rounding error, right? It's right. A rounding error. Well, we got about 5 minutes left on the hour here, David. So I'm going to ask my final question that I ask everybody. So I know as libertarians, we generally, just for the most part, want the government to leave us alone. We believe everything should be voluntary. We definitely don't like dictators, right? But I want you to forget that for a moment. And I want you to forget that you're going to be running for the House of Representatives. And instead, for a moment, envision that you have just been elected supreme dictator of the world. You get this really, really cool crown on it. You can adorn it in whatever you want, but it has a magical power in that you are able to, by thought, implement any one change. You can create anything. You can repeal anything. You can plant a seed in the minds of basically one wish, we'll call it, one political wish that you as an authoritarian dictator can submit upon the world. What would that one thing be and why?
Well, that's a really good question. There's sort of an irony there, right? In putting a libertarian of all people in charge of an autocracy.
Yes, yeah. Every libertarian who's been on the podcast has closed out with that question of, forget everything you believe in. You're the ultimate authoritarian for one action. What is it? Yeah.
Is it cheating to say your authoritarian move would be to end authoritarianism? I guess that's like an employer asking, what's your greatest weakness, and you say, I probably work too hard.
I will take it, right? What I think most people do is they try to find the one thing that does that, right? Like when Spike Cohen was on, he said he would end the Fed, with the idea being you topple the money, everything else dominoes behind it. But I like that idea where you could just plant the seed that everybody is anti-authoritarian, right?
Right. Yeah. I guess if I had to peel it down to one issue, I don't want to be too broad. It would probably be the war on drugs.
Okay.
But when you think about that, we talked about that earlier. It's been 50 years, since Nixon declared the war on drugs. That was 1971. What has it accomplished? Today, drug possession is the most arrested offense in the United States. But has consumption decreased? No, it's gone up. Have overdoses decreased? No, they've gone up too. Meanwhile, it's created a burden on taxpayers. Our prison systems are overcrowded, disproportionately affecting minority communities. It led to higher crime by creating black markets. It's also led to more encounters with the police, which increases the likelihood of incidents of police brutality. You see how that's worked out. And it's created this cycle of addiction because they get out of prison with criminal records, making it more difficult for them to go find a job and get out of that life. The drug war has created a lot of problems without solving one. And if you were to ask most Americans, are we winning the war on drugs? I think the resounding answer you'll get back is no.
Drugs won a while ago.
Right, yeah. So why are we still doing the same thing? I think the evidence is clear. Increasing arrests and incarceration does not decrease drug usage. Yet if you were to decriminalize drugs, you would cut the revenue stream for gangs and violent organizations, and in the process, disincentivize engagement in those activities. The streets would be safer, we'd see an economic benefit, and we could start targeting drug usage in more effective ways. So with that said, I don't know how much time, do we have time to talk about Portugal?
David, at this point, I'm going to be honest, I planned for an hour, I gave you an out at the hour. I got as much time as you want, man. Let's talk Portugal, because I love the topic, and we could even tie that into, is it Oregon? It's either Oregon or Washington where we've got
Oregon.
Oh yeah,
Portland.
Or Portland, yeah. So, but Portugal. I love the topic of Portugal.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, first of all, I do support legalizing marijuana at the federal level. I think that's no surprise that the Libertarian takes that stance.
Sure.
But I also support decriminalizing all drugs. With that said, I don't want to just walk away from the problem and pretend like it doesn't exist either. I do think there's a strategy in place that has worked effectively and can serve as a reasonable guide to take more of a compassionate approach toward those dealing with this illness. And for that's where I would look to the Portugal model as a starting place. So I know you're familiar, Mike, with the Portugal model.
Yeah.
But, for those of your viewers who may not be, in 2000, Portugal decriminalized all drugs. At the time, they had a major drug crisis in their country. It seemed like a radical approach. Like, what are you doing? But it worked. Drug overdoses fell 90% over the course of the next decade. Their drug death toll is now one of the lowest in the world, sitting around 6 per million. Compare that to the average of the European Union, and I don't have the stats in front of me, but I want to say it's around 4 times that, like maybe 24 per million. But they accomplished this by treating addicts more like a patient and less like a criminal. They established what's called the Commission for Dissuasion of Drug Addiction. It assigned a commission of 3 individuals, basically a social worker, a psychiatrist, and an attorney, that have powers comparable to that of an arbitration committee. And these individuals, they can then recommend admission to drug rehabilitation facilities to give addicts the help they truly need. And you mentioned, there's been other models as well that have treated on a smaller level that are finding success. I believe Norway just passed it this last year, drug decriminalization. So I'm not sure if that's went into full effect yet. So I'll be very curious to see how that plays out. But the argument you hear against it, some people will say, well, Portugal isn't the United States. And that's true. Do you know what is the States? The United States is the United States. And how have our policies worked over that same period of time? Not so well, right?
Yeah.
So why on earth would we continue doing the same thing, the same way, doubling down on failed policies? Isn't it time we tried something different?
No, I mean, I agree. That's one of the things that, I'm probably more on the radical side within the Libertarian Party. On that side of thing where, I'm almost, I'd love to see the abolition of all taxation, right? But I'm also very pragmatic in the sense that, if I take incremental steps towards the freedom that I'd like to see, that to me is a no-brainer, right? You look at what the drug war costs, right? From arrest, right? You arrest this person with a little bit of a plant that's been on this planet for thousands of years, being safely used by humans the whole time. Now you have paying for the police officer involved in arresting that person, paying for everybody in the jail that has to go hold them, paying for the public defender, paying for the judges to put them through the process, paying for the court reporter. All of this money in so many different layers comes in here. And then, of course, because you have to keep the poor, we're going to include some fees, enough fees to ruin that person's life financially on top of all of this, but not enough to make it so that we're actually making a profit from this to reduce your taxes. We're going to steal all of it through taxes, but we're also going to destroy this. If you took all of that, right, and said, we're done with this, but just take that budget and say, you know what, we're going to shift this budget. And again, some libertarians will kill me on this one, especially my more radical friends on this. But again, it's not my end game here, but you apply that towards free treatment for anybody, right? Government socialized treatment if need be. Again, I'd like to think that as soon as this happens, some private, the private sector would come up and find far more efficient solutions to it.
Right.
But
well, they usually do.
Well, we usually do. But if you did that, to me, it's a no-brainer with what's going to happen with the outcomes, right? Because it's not like you putting this person in jail gets them clean. You look at the numbers. Right. Incarcerating people doesn't work in most cases as far as rehabilitating, right? So someone goes in because they're addicted to meth. Guess what? If you watch your county lockup page for a few more months, they're probably going to get busted for meth again. And I say that because I see it on my county lockup page, the same people for the same thing. So you go through this process, and it's not like jail is fixing things. Like if people were going to jail, coming out halfway to their PhD, completely clean, and going out and finding the cure for cancer, I might have to rethink everything I know about police and prison if they were getting those kind of outcomes. And it might be a serious change to my entire thought process, but that's not what's happening. Like you take even the most, and I had a conversation with a friend's 87-year-old grandmother who's very conservative Christian, and we had a conversation on legalizing heroin, right? And her argument really came down to, well, we have to do something because people will ruin their lives. And where I won her over, an 87-year-old lady, very conservative, very Christian, and I said, But let's look at the reality of the situation, because I agree with you. Heroin is horrible. Mm-hmm. Heroin is horrible. It will ruin lives. It will ruin families. It will decimate lives. But so does going to jail, right? Like, okay, so the drugs didn't ruin their life. Now they're getting beat up. They're getting abused by other people. Like, they're going through this. It's not like you improved the outcome. You just took them from a crappy situation to a different crappy situation. Only now when they get out, right now when they get out, if they just did drugs, you can get clean from that, right? Like sometimes it takes many attempts. Sometimes there's financial, I mean, there's a lot of things there. But if it's a non-violent person that goes to jail on a drug crime, they come out, they are now going to have a permanent economic impact. It's going to impact their employability and so many other things that if they didn't go to jail, they could have gotten clean. So you have people who are basically now coming out of jail clean off of whatever drug they were on, where if they didn't go to jail, they'd be fully employable, contributing member of society. But just by doing that, just by going through that process, you have now put a permanent negative impact on something that could have been temporary. And I came back to her and I said, if we were to just take all of the money, all those layers we talked about, and put that towards treatment, wouldn't everybody be better off? And 80 said, I never thought about that. Very Southern, and
you're winning.
She never thought of, but that's the thing. If you can, it's not a hard conversation to have, David. It's real. Usually people are going to have a breakdown on drugs of, you've got the moral issue, right? Where drugs are bad, body's the temple, you kind of got the whole, but it's about, okay, well, let's look at what's the reality of that comes. And then the other one is like the economic one, where, and I hate to say it, some statists are going to state, and they're okay with the police state and policing for profit and all of that. But then you can even make an economic argument with that, right? Like the economic argument is, okay, well, just let them do all of these things and you're going to keep more of your money, right? Like that's,
right.
If you don't use it to set up a rehabilitation center, maybe use 10% of it to set up rehab centers and give the other 90% back, right? Then it's just a matter of making math work. But to me, I'm just shocked that after all the history we've seen in the United States, all the way back to alcohol prohibition, like why are we still trying to stop people from doing things that don't hurt other people? It's just crazy to me. And I think we got a freeze there because David is frozen on my screen. So yeah, I on that note, we've got a little over an hour. I'm going to wrap it up on that note since David mentioned that we had a few little internet hiccups earlier, so I'm going to end it. We will see you next Sunday, 6 o'clock. Not sure if it'll be live or not, but thank you so much to David